I'm going to speak briefly about ISDS, and this is one of the kind of many acronyms that we have to deal with. It stands for Investor State Dispute Settlement, Investor State Dispute Settlement, and it's a part of a lot of trade agreements, including around 85 trade agreements that the UK is currently involved in. We've mentioned it a few times already. It's essentially a part of a trade agreement which says that if a state, a government, pursues policies that make it more difficult for a foreign investor to operate, to make profit, to trade freely, then that foreign investor, whether they're a UK investor investing in a different country that we have an agreement with, or an investor from one of those other countries investing in the UK, they have the right to bring a case against the government of the country which has supposedly pursued this policy that's made their life more difficult. And that case is for compensation. And rather than being brought through a public court in the UK or an international court, that case is heard by a tribunal that's set up essentially. It's set up as kind of provided for within the trade agreement. So it's a kind of special tribunal that only exists within that trade agreement. And it's composed of three professional judges. One of them will be appointed by one half of the trade deal, one country. A second will be appointed by the other half, and they'll agree on the third together. And those three judges will hear the case, and they will make a judgment as to whether compensation should be awarded. So some examples, obviously that's quite a complex kind of description, and it's a bit difficult to get a sense of. So I just wanted to talk through a few examples of where we can see ISDS in action. One of the ones that we've looked at recently is a UK company called Rockhopper. They are an oil and gas company, and they had a contract to drill oil off the coast of Italy. A few years ago, some Italian communities led a big campaign to try and ban oil drilling off the coast of Italy, and the Italian government agreed that actually they should put that ban in place. So after the enactment of the ban, Rockhopper brought an ISDS case against the state of Italy for £200 million, which they were successful in. And it's worth noting that the company Rockhopper originally only spent £30 million in doing the site exploration and starting to set up some of the drilling operation. The £200 million is their estimate of what they were losing out in terms of the future benefits, the future earnings, and the future profits from that oil drilling site. Another example with relevance to the UK is Ascent Resources, who are a fracking company, who had the right to develop a site in Slovenia. The Slovenian government a few years back didn't remove the contract, but said that as part of this contract, we want you to produce an impact assessment, an environmental impact assessment, saying what kind of impact your fracking is going to have. Ascent Resources thought that that was an unreasonable request that was going to damage their ability to make profits, and they brought a case against Slovenia using ISDS. In this case, it wasn't successful, but it cost Slovenia, I can't actually remember the figure, and it's not down here, but a number of millions of euros to fight that case, because the lawyers needed, who have the speciality, are very expensive, and often they go on for years and years. A third case, which has recently hit the news, or at least the news in the kind of trade justice world, is a US company called Prospera. They had successfully gained the rights to develop offshore low tax zone in Honduras, in a country in Central America. And then Honduras, in response to a lot of campaigning from their own citizens, realized that wasn't a route they wanted to go down anymore. Prospera is suing Honduras for $11 billion, which is 2/3 of Honduras's annual budget for everything. So that covers education, health, roads, everything that Honduras spends in a year, their Prospera is asking for 2/3 of that, which Honduras will not be able to afford, and that case is ongoing. So we're yet to hear whether that is going to be successful. Overall, over the last few decades, there have been a large number of ISDS cases that have been bought and dismissed, and because of the secrecy and opacity in the system, it's difficult to know exactly how many. But what we do know is that there have been 175 cases brought by companies relating to environmental regulations that they are trying to contest. And overall, of those 175 cases, 327 billion US dollars has been claimed. We don't know how much has actually been paid out, but overall, companies have successfully got more than $100 billion in payouts. And that's not just ISDS cases relating to the environment, but the broader number. And then I included as well this point around countries which have publicly said that they're not pursuing environmental or climate policies because they're worried about getting sued under ISDS. And Denmark and New Zealand, and actually also France, have publicly said that they're choosing not to go ahead with different policies because they're worried about the kind of cases that they might face from investors. ISDS in the UK. So the UK is a major feature on the kind of ISDS landscape. UK firms are the third most frequent user of ISDS behind American firms top and then Dutch firms second. The UK itself has never been successfully sued under ISDS. We haven't had a huge number of cases that have been brought to the UK, but UK firms have used it very frequently to sue other countries. And as I said at the start, the UK is party to around 86 agreements containing ISDS. One of the recent agreements that we've actually withdrawn from was called the Energy Charter Treaty. And that was a trade agreement that covered, I think at one point, more than 50 countries and specifically covered energy. I can't remember when it was, March or April this year, the UK made the decision to withdraw from that treaty. And I've included here the quote from the UK Energy Minister, who said that the Energy Charter Treaty membership does not support our transition to a cleaner, cheaper energy and could even penalize us for our world-leading efforts to deliver net zero. So in some ways, the UK has withdrawn from an element of this kind of overall system, but it remains very closely engaged with it. Globally, I just wanted to give a quick sense, and there's again lots of acronyms here, so I apologize. ISDS is in some ways in retreat, so it's not included in the US and Mexico-Canada agreement, which was agreed a few years back. It's not included in trade deal called the RCEP, which is a big trade deal in Asia and the Pacific, covers about a third of the world economy. And some countries are beginning to withdraw from it. The UK, as I said, with the Energy Charter Treaty. Also, I don't know if you remember Rob Davies, the South African minister who spoke. When he was Minister for Trade, he took South Africa out of all of the agreements that they had containing ISDS. And other countries, Tanzania, Colombia, have done the same. The EU has recently suspended all of the, or at least started the process of suspending ISDS agreements between countries in the EU. But in lots of places, it remains in place. There are more than 1,000 ISDS agreements that still remain in place. The Energy Charter Treaty, despite us withdrawing from it, is still there. And the UK has recently signed up to a new trade agreement called the CPTPP, which covers 11 countries in the Pacific region, and that contains ISDS. So even last year, the UK was signing up to new ISDS agreements. I haven't mentioned the arguments that people make in favor of ISDS, and I wanted to do that. So those that support the system say that it provides international investors with certainty and predictability. And in a situation where you're establishing new operations, you're building a factory, you're investing in buildings and infrastructure, people find it very useful to know that they can rely on having a tool that they can use if government policy all of a sudden changes and they might otherwise kind of lose the value of that investment. And it also can be used by investors if their assets are expropriated by foreign governments. So if a government was to just say, nice factory you've built here, that'll be ours now. A company would have the ability to use ISDS to fight against that expropriation.